Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin, the man responsible for tens of millions of deaths across the Soviet Union, met his end on the floor of his own bedroom, and nobody dared help him for hours. On the night of March 1st, 1953, guards at his dacha in Kuntsevo grew suspicious when the lights in his room hadn't changed position all day. They finally entered and found him collapsed on the floor, paralyzed and soaked in urine from a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Here's the darkest part. Stalin had just purged much of his own medical establishment in the so-called doctor's plot, accusing Jewish physicians of plotting to assassinate Soviet leaders. So when his inner circle finally called for help, qualified doctors were either arrested, terrified, or simply unavailable. He lay dying for 4 days while Beria, Khrushchev, and Malenkov hovered nearby. Some reportedly relieved, others calculating their next move. He died on March 5th, 1953, at age 74, unconscious and convulsing, surrounded by men who feared him too much to save him and hated him too much to try. Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini, the man who invented the modern template for fascism, spent his final hours disguised in a German soldier's coat trying to sneak out of a country he had ruled for over 2 decades. Captured by Italian communist partisans on April 27, 1945, near Lake Como, while hiding in a German military convoy, he was taken to a villa overnight and shot the following morning alongside his mistress, Clara Petacci. But the story didn't end there. Their bodies were loaded into a van and driven to Milan, to Piazzale Loreto, the same square where partisans had been publicly executed months earlier. There, they were hung upside down by their ankles from the roof of a gas station. The crowd that gathered beat the corpses, spat on them, and threw objects at them for hours. The exact identity of his executioner remains disputed, with Walter Audizio being the most commonly cited name. After 23 years of iron rule, Mussolini ended as a swinging body above a petrol pump. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler died approximately 1,500 meters below the streets of a Berlin being torn apart by Soviet artillery, inside a concrete bunker he had barely left in months. On April 30th, 1945, with Red Army soldiers less than a kilometer away, Hitler shot himself in the right temple with his own pistol. Eva Braun, whom he had married less than 40 hours earlier, died beside him by cyanide. Per his explicit instructions, their bodies were carried up to the Reich Chancellery Garden, doused in petrol, and set alight. Soviet forces discovered the charred remains days later. Russian forensic teams recovered skull fragments and jaw sections, which were matched to Hitler's dental records, though fringe theories about his survival persisted for decades. Forensic analysis published in 2018 confirmed the teeth matched. He was 56 years old. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12. Hideki Tojo. Hideki Tojo, Japan's wartime prime minister and the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, tried to shoot himself through the heart when American soldiers arrived to arrest him in September 1945, and missed. The bullet hit him in the chest, but bypassed his heart by centimeters. A U.S. Army doctor immediately operated to save his life, not out of mercy, but so he could stand trial. Tojo spent the next 3 years in Sugamo prison, recovering and facing the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, where he was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was hanged on December 23, 1948. His ashes were later enshrined at Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo, a decision that remains deeply controversial across Asia to this day. The man who tried to deny his captors their trial ended up giving them exactly what they wanted: Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong, whose policies caused an estimated 40 to 80 million deaths through famine, purges, and political violence, spent his final years physically hollowed out by 2 simultaneous conditions. His personal physician, Dr. Li Jisui, later revealed in his memoir that Mao had been diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, which progressively stripped him of the ability to speak, swallow, and move. He also suffered a series of increasingly severe heart attacks throughout 1976. The diagnosis was deliberately kept from Mao himself for months. He died on September 9, 1976 in Beijing at age 82. Rather than burial, his body was embalmed and placed in a crystal sarcophagus inside a purpose-built mausoleum at Tiananmen Square, where it remains on public display to this day. The man who remade China in his own image is now a fixture of the tourist itinerary: Francisco Franco. Francisco Franco, Spain's dictator for 36 years, did not go quietly. His death was less a passing than a prolonged medical siege. By late 1975, Franco was simultaneously battling Parkinson's disease, congestive heart failure, acute kidney failure, peritonitis, and recurring internal bleeding, a catalog of organ failures that would have killed most men months earlier. His medical team, under intense political pressure, kept him alive through increasingly aggressive interventions, forcing Spain to watch its dictator be resuscitated again and again in what many described as grotesque. He finally died on November 20th, 1975, 1975, at age 82. The same date by coincidence as the 1936 execution of Falangist founder José Antonio Primo de Rivera, a date Franco had long used as a propaganda symbol. Spain had waited so long for his death that when it finally came, some newspapers had the obituaries pre-written and pre-typeset. The dying had lasted longer than the grieving. Ante Pavelić, the Croatian Ustasha leader whose puppet state ran extermination camps and oversaw the massacre of hundreds of thousands of Serbs, Jews, and Roma during World War II, escaped justice through the so-called rat lines, escape networks that moved Nazi war criminals out of Europe after the war, with reported assistance from certain Vatican intermediaries. Pavelić ended up in Argentina, living relatively freely for over a decade. In 1957, a Yugoslav Secret Service agent shot him twice in Buenos Aires. The wounds were serious, but not immediately fatal. Pavelić lingered for nearly 2 years, his body slowly failing from the damage. He died on December 28, 1959 in Madrid, under the protection of Franco's Spain. He was never prosecuted for any war crime. He died in a bed of gunshot wounds in a friendly country, which for a man of his crimes felt like a verdict of its own. Jean-Bédel Bokassa, who declared himself emperor of the Central African Empire in a coronation that cost an estimated $30 million, roughly a third of his country's annual budget, and who was later convicted of cannibalism and the massacre of schoolchildren, somehow managed to die of a heart attack in his own home. After being overthrown by a French military intervention in 1979, tried, sentenced to death, then having that sentence commuted twice, Bokassa was eventually released in 1993. He died on November 3, 1996, in Bangui at age 75. Reports suggest he died while watching television. The man who had feasted at a coronation modeled on Napoleon, who kept a human body reportedly found in his freezer, died as an old man in a chair. History doesn't always deliver the endings it should. Nicolae Ceaușescu and his wife Elena became the only communist leaders in Eastern Europe to be executed during the revolutions of 1989. After 24 years of increasingly paranoid and brutal rule, the Romanian uprising caught him off guard in December of that year. He and Elena fled Bucharest by helicopter on December 22nd, were captured within hours, and on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1989, were given a military tribunal that lasted approximately 2 hours. Both were found guilty of genocide and crimes against the state. They were taken outside immediately after the verdict and shot by a firing squad of volunteers. The execution was filmed and broadcast on Romanian national television that same evening. Romanians watched it on Christmas Day. Ceaușescu reportedly shouted that history would avenge him. The firing squad did not wait to find out. Francisco Macías Nguema of Equatorial Guinea, a man who declared himself God, banned the word intellectual, and oversaw the murder of roughly a third of his own country's population during his 11-year rule, was executed by the people he most trusted. In August 1979, his own nephew, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, led a military coup against him. Macías Nguema was captured, tried, and found guilty of genocide, treason, and embezzlement. He was executed by firing squad on September 29, 1979. Reports indicate that the Ecuadorian soldiers assigned to shoot him were too frightened, likely due to his reputation as a sorcerer, and that Moroccan troops had to carry out the execution instead. He died at approximately age 55. His nephew, who overthrew him, has ruled Equatorial Guinea ever since. Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge leader, responsible for the deaths of approximately 2 million Cambodians, roughly a quarter of the entire country, never once faced a formal war crimes tribunal. After being driven from power by a Vietnamese invasion in 1979, he spent nearly 2 decades hiding in the Cambodian jungle near the Thai border, commanding a diminishing guerrilla force. In 1997, his own former comrades finally turned on him and placed him under a form of jungle house arrest. He died on April 15, 1998, of apparent heart failure at roughly age 72. His body was cremated on a makeshift pyre assembled from tires, wood, and rubbish, set alight in the jungle clearing where he died. Some investigators have suggested he may have been poisoned, though this was never confirmed. The International Tribunal for Khmer Rouge crimes was still being assembled when he died. It finished without him. Enver Hoxha ruled Albania for 40 years, longer than almost any other European leader of the 20th century, sealing his country off from the rest of the world so completely that he banned private cars, religion, and contact with foreigners. His final years were defined by deteriorating health. He suffered from diabetes for decades, which progressively damaged his heart and circulatory system. He died of heart failure on April 11, 1985, in Tirana, at age 76. He had spent his last years increasingly detached from governance while still nominally in power. Albania, at the time of his death, had roughly 200,000 concrete military bunkers built across the country, one for every 14 citizens, as part of his paranoid defense strategy. The bunkers are still there. Hoxha is not. Idi Amin. Idi Amin, the Ugandan dictator responsible for an estimated 100,000 to 500,000 deaths during his 8-year rule, died not in a prison or on a gallows, but in a comfortable hospital bed in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. Overthrown by Tanzanian forces in 1979, he fled first to Libya, then settled in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where he lived for over 2 decades entirely unpunished, reportedly never expressing remorse for anything. Uganda filed extradition requests. Saudi Arabia ignored them. He died of kidney failure on August 16, 2003, at approximately age 78, at King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Jeddah. The most charitable thing history records about his final years is that he enjoyed cooking. That is genuinely the most charitable thing. Augusto Pinochet. Augusto Pinochet outlived justice by a matter of technicalities. The Chilean dictator, responsible for the torture and disappearance of thousands after his 1973 coup, was dramatically arrested in London in October 1998 on a Spanish extradition warrant, the first time a former head of state had been detained abroad under the principle of universal jurisdiction. He spent 503 days under house arrest in Britain before being released on medical grounds. Back in Chile, he faced over 300 criminal charges. He suffered a heart attack and died on December 10, 2006, at age 91, which happened to be International Human Rights Day. No conviction was ever finalized. His supporters held a memorial. His victims' families noted the date. He died in a military hospital in Santiago surrounded by family, which was more than most of his victims had. Saparmurat Niyazov. Saparmurat Niyazov, who ruled Turkmenistan from 1990 until his death and renamed himself Turkmenbashi, father of all Turkmens, constructed one of the most elaborate personality cults in modern history. He renamed the months of the calendar after himself, and his mother built a golden rotating statue of himself in the capital that always faced the sun, and authored a spiritual text called the Runama, which he declared sacred and required to be memorized for driving tests and university entrance exams. He died suddenly of cardiac arrest on December 21, 2006, at age 66, reportedly with no serious illness publicly known beforehand. His death came as a complete surprise to the country, partly because no succession plan existed, and partly because admitting the leader was mortal had never been part of the program. The golden statue kept rotating after he died. No one turned it off immediately. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, who had ruled Iraq for 24 years and survived multiple assassination attempts, coup plots, and 2 major wars, was found hiding in a hole in the ground. On December 13, 2003, U.S. forces discovered him in Ad-Dawr near Tikrit in a concealed underground chamber, roughly 2 meters deep, that soldiers dubbed the Spider Hole. He was bearded, disheveled, and offered no resistance. Tried by the Iraqi Special Tribunal, he was convicted of crimes against humanity for the 1982 Dujail massacre, in which 148 Shia civilians were killed, and sentenced to death. He was hanged on December 30, 2006 at Camp Justice in Baghdad. An unofficial video recorded on a mobile phone captured the execution, including chaotic taunting from Shia witnesses in the room, and leaked globally within hours. The footage caused international controversy. Saddam Hussein, who had ordered thousands to their deaths, spent his last seconds being mocked by a crowd with a phone. Muammar Gaddafi, who had ruled Libya for 42 years, and was once described as the King of Kings of Africa, at his own insistence, was found hiding in a drainage culvert outside Sirte on October 20, 2011. Rebel forces had cornered his convoy during a NATO airstrike. Gaddafi ran on foot and crawled into a concrete sewage pipe. He was pulled out alive, bleeding from wounds and beaten by a mob. Video footage captured on multiple mobile phones. Footage that circulated globally within the hour shows what happened next. He was shot in the head, though whether he was executed deliberately or killed in the surrounding chaos remains disputed. His body was subsequently displayed in a commercial refrigeration unit in Misrata for several days, with crowds lining up to see it. After 42 years of declaring himself the guide of a revolution, Gaddafi's last confirmed shelter was a drainage pipe. Kim Jong-il, North Korea's second supreme leader, died on December 17, 2011, reportedly aboard his personal train while traveling between cities. State media attributed his death to a great mental and physical strain caused by his tireless devotion to the Korean people, which is to say, a heart attack, though the regime never used those words directly. His death was was not announced for 51 hours. When it finally was, North Korea entered a mandatory 11-day mourning period during which citizens were required to weep publicly and visibly. Reports from defectors and monitoring groups indicated that citizens who appeared insufficiently grief-stricken faced punishment or detention. Kim Jong-il was 69 years old. He was succeeded by his son, Kim Jong-un. North Korea informed no foreign government before making the announcement. The country that tells its people everything tells the world nothing. Hugo Chávez. Hugo Chávez, Venezuela's socialist authoritarian who had ruled since 1999, was diagnosed with cancer in 2011 and spent his final 2 years traveling repeatedly to Cuba for surgery and treatment, while keeping the specific nature of his illness vague to the Venezuelan public. Despite visibly deteriorating, he won re-election in October 2012. He died on March 5, 2013 in Caracas at age 58, the same date exactly 60 years after that Joseph Stalin died. The coincidence was noted widely in the press. Some Venezuelan officials and supporters publicly alleged that the United States had somehow given Chávez cancer, a claim for which no evidence was ever produced. His cancer is generally believed to have been pelvic or colorectal in origin, though the government never officially confirmed the type. He was buried in a military museum in Caracas. The Stalin death date parallel remains, depending on who you ask, either a haunting coincidence or completely meaningless. Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe ruled Zimbabwe for 37 years, overseeing a hyperinflation that reached 89.7 sextillion% annually, violent seizures of white-owned farms, and the systematic elimination of political opposition. He was removed from power not by an election or an uprising, but by a military coup in November 2017, after which he resigned rather than face impeachment. He spent his final years traveling to Singapore for medical treatment, largely absent from the country he had destroyed. He died on September 6, 2019, of kidney failure at the Gleneagles Hospital in Singapore at age 95, making him one of the oldest dictators in history at the time of death. His burial then became a dispute between his family and the Zimbabwean government, with arguments over location lasting more than a month. He was eventually interred at the National Heroes Acre in Harare. Zimbabwe's economy did not recover when he left power. It did not recover when he died either. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.